problem that is probably dear to most of your hearts, and that is living in New Zealand with debt. Now, first of all, I'd like to find out from you, will all of you put your hands up if you either own your own home or would like to own your own home one day? Both, if you'd like to own or you say. Now, keep your hands up. Put your hands down if you already own your own home and don't have a mortgage. That's a few down. Put your hands down if you still need to buy your house and you want to still buy a house you're still renting. Right? So most of you have actually put up your hands at some point and they've gradually gone down. We're in an election year and we are starting to see a lot of the political parties talking about all the important things like medical health, security, education, and most importantly also housing. There's been a lot of information around there about land ownership, foreign land ownership. We've heard that in the news a lot lately. We've also heard in the news of an increasing gap between those that have in this country and those that do not have in this country. We also can go to Statistics New Zealand and see that there is this gradual decline in actual home ownership in the country. So something's not working in our country at the moment. And I'm not claiming to be the expert in front of you, but I do feel passionately about it, which is why I'm your keynote speaker today. I believe there are some solutions, but we've got to start thinking outside of the square to understand how we can change things. I personally don't feel any political party at the moment has got the answer that is sustainable, that's going to reverse some of these trends that I've given to you and satisfy your needs to live in a home of your own without feeling you have to spend 30 years of your life paying for a mortgage, because that's the lot of a lot of people today. It makes me think of something that I read in the North Shore Times recently. There was a man, and he was the head of the household. Both of them worked on the minimum wage, and they were renting, I think somewhere in South Auckland, and they said they were spending more than 50% of their earnings, their net earnings, on rental. They were in a situation where they can't buy any extras for their children. I don't know how many children he has, I don't know if he smokes and spends money on other things, but 50% of your combined wages in a household just to pay rent, which is lower than a mortgage, means we have a problem. I want you, first of all, look at a future vision. My future vision is for three types of people. The first one is the mortgagees, those who have a big fat mortgage. How would you like to have $1,130 put into your account every month without a change of where you live and the job you have? Does that sound like magic? It does, doesn't it? How about if you were a renter, like this family in South Auckland, and the government, instead of giving you the $3 to $7 minimum wage increase, which some of our parties want to do, you got it because you were paying less rent? Or what about if you were a homeowner and you've heard the saying, acid rich, cash poor, which is what the old people have. What if suddenly the government could give you a $1,130 increase in your pension without you having to change your home or your lifestyle? Well, you would change your lifestyle if you had more money, wouldn't you? So that's my vision, and I want to show you a model that we could get there. It's not going to be a model that you're going to have probably heard a lot about, but it's got a mathematical model behind it. Let's start off, first of all, by seeing where we are. I've started off by showing you a picture here of a typical, what we call a typical Auckland household. Statistics New Zealand says an average house in Auckland is about $560,000, so you're going to probably have about a $500,000 mortgage sitting on it. And at the current sort of 20 years at 6.5%, your outgoings per year are about $44,000 to pay for that home. If you work the statistics out, if you were on a minimum wage, it is nearly double the minimum wage for trying to pay off that particular mortgage. So already we have a bit of a problem. But why is that have to be like that? We've got 500,000 on the one side that we have to borrow, and we're paying all this money off to where? Who do we pay that money to? A bank, a commercial bank, right? They get that money from us because they've settled the debt with the person who owned the property before. Notice I'm using the word property now. Let's have a look at what happens if we do this. If we decide to take the land away from the property and we decide to finance them differently, so we'll say it's a roughly 50-50 split, just so we can make it easy. It's a little bit different depending on where you live. But if we said that the house was going to be more at 6.5% the commercial rates, and a house that has rebuilding costs, that's what your outgoings are, about half, 21,000. However, if the land portion could be extended over 50 years at the standard growth rate that we know Statistics New Zealand will tell us happens in this country, your outgoings to pay for land at that value would only be $7,913 a year. That translates to that 13,000, that 1,130 I talked about, or nearly a $7 per hour wage net increase. Now, you're going to say to me, Anthony, you sound like a bit of a socialist here. Are you asking, how are you going to achieve those numbers? Because no commercial bank can do that. They can't loan you the money at that rate. The central bank tells you can't loan money at that rate. No one's going to have a return on investment. So the only way we can actually do that is look at the model in this way. We know that prices are set by demand. And we continually hear that land is in short supply, therefore that fuels the demand, fuels the price. However, in reality, we know we live in a very underpopulated country relative to other places in the world. The shortage of land is really an artificial thing. So if we go and look at this model, and we see that if at the top we say that people can still build an improvement on the land, and that's going to have to be done under commercial terms, that's well and good. But if we said the government effectively not necessarily own the land, but control the price of the land. That's one question mark, is how do they control the price of the land to keep it at 250,000 so that we only have that net outgoing going to the bank? Well, first of all, the government is going to have to establish a land bank, right? So what's going to happen is the money down the bottom is going to go to the government because they say it's not a very risky investment sitting on land. It doesn't change much unless there's an earthquake like in Christchurch, and I'm not being flippant about that. It doesn't often happen. I built a house. After 14 years, the pipes haven't moved, the land hasn't moved, some grass has grown. The land doesn't change much. So why has, in 14 years, the cost of a basket of goods increased by a factor of 1.4, which is the compound rate, and the value of land by a factor of 3, nearly twice that? What has caused that artificial increase in value? And it's largely through the demand model and through a commercial model that says you have to pay for the land at the same rate as a house. So therefore, what we can move towards is a tactical plan to try to move towards this lower land financing thing. Here's some suggestions I have. First of all, finances and mortgages and leases should occur through a land bank. So the state does not necessarily have to own the land, but they have to put the price on the land. Now, if you think about it, those of you homeowners who've built a house, you know that already the government places a lot of restrictions on what you can do with your land anyway. The Resource Management Act already tells you what sort of structure you can put on it. They'll even tell you you have to, I was hearing someone say if you have stairs more than 3 steps, you have to put a balustrade on it, even if you're never going to fall off it. You've got an awful lot of restrictions around what you can and cannot do with the land. So already there's a lot of control, making, in theory, land not a particularly good option, because You know, if you buy a car, you don't want the government to tell you when you can use it and, you know, what time of the day you can ride in it and you can't use that road on a certain day or whatever it is. You want to feel some freedom in it. So what we're saying here is, I'm trying to put a case for saying, why is land so attractive? And it probably goes back to a saying that is attributed to Mark Twain many hundreds of years ago, and you've probably heard it quoted more recently in the media: buy land, they don't make any more of it. And in a sense, it is that sort of scarce commodity. But buying the land, we've got to think of the reasons around why we want to acquire land. Generally, homeowners, and I'm a homeowner myself, would say, well, I look at people who rent properties and they might have a 6-month or 12-month lease. Now, when you're young, it's okay, you're on the move. But when you're getting a bit older, you don't want to be kicked out of your house. So the idea is, if I own my own property, it's my castle, no one can kick me out. Right, so that leads on to some other things of how we can actually go about this. We could have the government under a Public Works Act doing mass expropriation of land and say, well, from the January 1st, 2015, the government owns all the land based on any new sale that occurs after that particular date. That would be quite radical, and I don't think it would be particularly popular, and I don't think any political party will get in on that. So I don't think that's one of the tactics necessarily. But what we could also do is do some more tightening of the Resource Management Act on what you can actually do. But we've got quite a lot of that already anyway. The other thing we can do is try and create a level playing field with foreign buyers versus New Zealand buyers. Remember that 6.5% commercial rate, right? Remember how that set the level of what your outgoings were and also the short term. Well, foreign investors sometimes are borrowing at 0.5% from the countries that they have. Therefore, you can see that the financial equation works quite differently. Sometimes it's a lump sum of capital. That also drives up the price because there's an interest in the scarce commodity that they see. And secondly, the last point of the tactic is greenfields. There is plenty of land that the government owns already that has to be developed in the future. That land can stay in leasehold. And that, I think, is actually the answer for a lot of young people in this country, is to demand that the government provides leasehold land for you. Because if it provides leasehold land, you can demand a 50-year 2.5%. Because, hey, you don't have to fleece the coffers of a commercial bank. So what are the benefits of a new model? A new model like this would stimulate the New Zealand economy dramatically, because I just told you, you're going to have more money in your pocket. So you can spend more money. You're also going to free up people making improvements to their house, because they've got more money now to put improvements to the house, not pay a bank for the privilege of owning the land. The second one is that we can start offering equity release for the elderly. Now, already, the elderly can get equity release through private institutions. You can actually go along and get an equity release, and there's a wash-up after you die. Well, the government could actually offer that same thing for you, possibly under more attractive terms, but also they could then acquire some portion of that land moving forward in terms of their ability to lease it in the future. Mortgagees, like those of you younger here who've got crippling mortgages, would get instant relief if you could decide to put a portion, when you're purchasing, putting a portion of your house onto leasehold. It would lower the price of properties just about overnight, because suddenly investors won't have the incentive anymore for the investment, because the capital gain's not going to go up because the government has a controlling interest on the price. Already, I went to mention your rates, your rates that you pay the councils. Already the valuation figures there are way out of line often with commercial rates that you'll get anyway. So there's already an underlying valuation of your property that you can see. And fifthly, there will be a reduction in the rental properties. Why? Because landlords don't need to show a return. I mean, most property investors, I have to include myself as having one investment property, are mortgaged to the hilt. Totally, but they're mortgaged to the hilt. and they've paid commercial rates. So they pass that down to the people who rent. So that's where your people in South Auckland who are struggling at the rent burden will be able to have more money in their pocket because there'll be less rent going through to the banks. Another benefit is lifetime tenure of leased land. So the thing of people sitting there and feeling, I have to buy the land and then I'm secure, is a fallacy. The government says, for your lifetime, the area that you decide to call home at any one time is yours for however long you want. You have lifetime tenure. You don't have to worry that someone's going to kick you off because you'll be covered by law. GST payable on the sale of the land, so on the improvement. Just like anything in business where value is added, GST is paid. Well, the same, in a sense, should be done on land. Why should it be any different? We don't have to call it a capital gains tax. We can just call it GST, which everyone understands, and it's at a certain rate. So it just fits in with everything else in the economy where there's value add. It's also a solution to the state housing problem. What we've seen is a trend of government saying, ooh, these state houses are on this valuable land. We must sell this valuable land, get lots of money, and then we sort of can do other houses in cheaper areas. And it's all an artificial thing, isn't it? By selling that land, you're not actually solving the problem. You're creating a problem of private ownership and then driving up all the prices. That's really part of the problem. We've already talked about the increase in jobs. There will be an increase in jobs if you can free up the cash flow. So with all of this, there are losers, aren't there? For this strategy, you've got to have some losers. So the first losers are the banks, the commercial banks. Of course they're going to lose. But hey, we don't care. They're all owned by Aussie anyway. So why would we want to worry about that? We would keep the money internally in our land bank, so we'd circulate it around in a much better way. The Aussies will get used to it, I'm sure. The other people would be the landowners and investors. They will, in the short term, be losers. But they need not see themselves as losers because they are amongst the wealthy in the population. They'll be putting their money into more productive things like businesses. Businesses have already learned the strategy of not owning the land and not owning the building that they conduct their business in because they know it's about cash flow. It's not about owning an asset that increases artificially in value. So those investors would be a short-term disappointment, but suddenly the stock exchange would improve. Suddenly it would be businesses to invest in. Handling the naysayers' objections. State-owned land interferes with the free market. Hey, have I discussed anything about a free market being more constrained by this? I've talked about more jobs, more money in your pockets. More money in your pockets gives you more choices. You still will have that house on the land that you can improve and it's still yours. But you don't have to worry about the land portion. Reduction in foreign investment. Why is that a big problem? Because we will be growing, our economy is growing without necessarily the increase in foreign investment. The problem is that the government's still got to balance its books with a large debt. But the only way we're going to do it is by creating jobs, creating the money go around in our own particular country. So reduction in foreign investment, just in residential properties, nothing. Less secure tenure, I've talked about that. We won't have the problem because the government will underpin and say, you're a New Zealand citizen, if you're leasing one piece of land for you to live on, you've got it for the rest of your life. Even if you move every 7 years, you just re-establish that tenure. Reduce freedom of choice. Now let's think about a little bit about this. One other thing I wanted to touch on was, how do we handle property that is in high demand, the ones with the sea views and things like that? My view is, look at auctioning on the interest rate that's paid on the financing. Not the price, the interest rate. Put that on an auction. Think about that afterwards. We won't share the close. Land values are the heart of the big problem in our country. It's those artificial land values. We have to address that. Let's look at new ways of doing that. I've suggested some. Land reform is possible, but it's complex. It's going to take time. You can't make the change overnight, but you must make a start. And thirdly, addressing the land rights has a huge economic impact on New Zealanders and the economy. There's huge advantages of doing it, and I would encourage you to start the discussions today. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Anthony, for a very thoughtful